How's it going, everybody? In this video, I'm going to be talking about Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, a little bit of a book review, and kind of some of the key concepts. So, Letters from a Stoic is best for those who are interested in classic philosophy and don't mind parsing language that's a little bit older. It's also good for those who have an interest in friendship, death, wealth, and developing a good life. Touches on all kinds of topics, but those are some of the main themes. The difficulty to digest. So, Letters from a Stoic is fairly difficult to digest just because it's a really old classic philosophy text, right? So it's going to take some time for most people to kind of parse some of those different pieces, unless that's something that you already do regularly. Most people are going to be well served by having some sort of guide or outline or summary or some other supplemental piece of material to help them work through some of the concepts and ideas. Key insights. So Seneca covers a huge range of topics in his letters, and they really only have slight connections between each, I guess I'll call them chapters, but they're different letters. Here I'm going to focus on some of the major themes that stood out, as opposed to trying to nitpick and go through every single letter. A lot of them are fairly concise, pointed. It's conversational, right, because they are letters. But due to the age of the text, it can be a little bit hard to parse at times. Overall, however, there's a lot of really interesting ideas, examples, comparisons, metaphors, things that are really interesting. It's just not super easy to get through unless you're already in this realm. So one of the biggest repeated themes is death. And Seneca basically looks at death as just a part of life that we need to become accustomed to and accept. And he makes a bunch of different comparisons and has a bunch of different ways of looking at death that helps make it a little bit more digestible. So, for example, one of the ideas is, well, were you disappointed and sad about all the time that happened before you were alive? And, naturally, you're not going to be sad about 1200, right? You weren't around in 1200. You don't know anything about what was going on then, or had nothing to do with it. Well, if that's the case, then why are you going to be disappointed or sad about all the time in the future that you're going to miss? And when you put it on that bigger time scale, it makes it a little bit less disappointing that you're not going to be around for that kind of stuff. Now, of course, those little points aren't probably going to be enough to drastically change your perspective on death, but he takes a bunch of different little shots at that help chip away at some of the fear and some of the other negativity associated with death. Another really strong example that I liked is Seneca points out that most people are afraid of the actual moment of dying, whereas actually any moment we spend is a moment that is spent and can't be returned. So in essence, we're spending, this life force that we have over time, spending each little moment, and whatever the exact last moment happens to be isn't really that important, right? Because we've already been spending, all these moments throughout our lives. One additional moment doesn't mean anything. So on that note, the quality is more important than the quantity. And most people are worried about extending the actual quantity. But again, going back to these moments, we're spending these moments already. So according to Seneca, if your quality of life dips below a certain point, it's not really worth it anymore. That's up for debate, but that's sort of some of the ideas. Another angle that he takes on death is basically death takes away all future negative events, right? So when death comes, you no longer have to be afraid of getting sick, feeling bad, having all these sorts of negative events. So again, these are different angles that are probably not going to drastically change your take on life and death, but they are interesting points to consider and may help you reframe a little bit and become a little bit more accustomed to or okay with the idea of death, since it is something that will happen regardless. It's really just a part of life, and one that, at least in my experience and in the circles that I've been in, isn't well explored. So it's nice to have a little bit of time on that subject and really considering some different angles that make it a little more approachable. Another major theme is friendship, and there's not a ton to say here besides that Seneca basically really values friendship and says that we should all spend time developing as many friends as we can, and really, really cherishing those relationships as they develop and as they exist, because the best friends that we have, the people that we really connect with, are those who we will feel 100% confident being completely open with and not having to hold any secrets from, and that's really refreshing and freeing and part of living a good life. Another repeated theme is the idea of internal resilience versus external wealth. And basically, there are a bunch of different points around saying a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to get these material possessions without actually working on their internal resilience. And there's a bunch of different examples he uses. So one is like, what use is having golden plates, right? Why would you want to eat off of golden plates if you can't handle the emotions of fear or loathing or jealousy or whatever else happens to ail you, right? The quality of life is not improved by things that you own, it's improved by your experience. And since the major moderator of your experience is your internal resilience, for lack of a better word, that's what it makes sense to focus your time on if you want to live a good life. Another interesting point made in this realm is that not having things doesn't prove that you're any more resilient or that you have anything better than anyone else, right? So in the same way that having gold plates to eat off of doesn't make your experience better, neither does eating out of your hands, right? Like the possessions that you have do not necessarily influence the way that you experience the world. So some people, try to make a show of like, well, I don't have anything, so this is by far the better way to live. But Seneca points out that it doesn't matter. These external pieces don't matter in either direction. So what really is important is how you are able to interact with your world and manage your emotions and some of these other experiences. Another final point is that material possessions, regardless of the setup of where you are in life, can be taken away, right? There is always a potential situation where you could lose all of the material possessions you've gained, all of the wealth, everything. But the internal things, your knowledge, your abilities, skills, things like that, can never be taken from you because they're part of your essence, part of your being. And so you are much better served focusing on those than on obtaining things from the outside, because again, it's always possible, but those things can be taken from you. All right, another major theme is how to just live a good life, and there are a ton of different topics here, so I'm not going to try to get on top of every single piece and share that here. But basically, at a high level, it's about spending your time in ways that are going to produce a good life. So one of the examples is he takes a lot of pot shots at things that are only done to produce wit, but don't actually improve your life. So there's a bunch of different like wordplay type of things, or basically like really focusing on the philosophy and distinction of really specific topics that don't really tie back into living a good life. And he kind of looks at those as not extremely useful. Then he talks about all kinds of other psych topics now, right? Like gratitude, grit, reducing anxiety, over exercising, speaking simply. There's a whole list of things that he kind of talks about here and there that are all about having a better life. All right, so the final opinion, I think Letters from a Stoic is a really interesting read with a lot of useful ideas, but it can be a bit challenging depending on your ability to parse some of that language. I think most people are going to have a little bit of a hard time with it. So my recommendation would be to read through it with some sort of summary guide or alternative source that's going to give you that extra piece of information that you need without you trying to just kind of get through it on your own. Because, like I said, unless you're really deep in this stuff already, it's going to be a little bit tricky. But the ideas are worth it. Now, some other considerations. Some of the subjects in the letters are really, they feel random and they don't necessarily feel connected. That's because they're letters, right? So if you want a guide to better living, like if that's the number one thing you're looking for, this is going to be a little bit of a winding path through that. You might be able to find a resource that's a little bit more targeted and not so much a snapshot of this person's kind of life and experience and thoughts. Another consideration is there are quite a few bigoted comments peppered throughout the books. There's some sexism. There's a bunch of talk against being an effeminate man. So if you're sensitive to this kind of language, that's in there. A warning, heads up. Obviously, the ideas are generally applicable, but some of the specific words that are used and some of the specific language that comes out is a little bit bigoted. All right, on to the reflection questions. 1. What is your relationship with death? 2. How might you develop more quality friendships? 3. Do you spend more time building internal resilience or external wealth? So all in all, like I said, I think it's a pretty good book. It's useful. There's some nuances, some parsing to be done. But if you're a little bit farther in your journey or kind of want to get into some of the classics, it's going to be a good resource with some nice ideas. That's all I've got for this video. As always, if you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, put them in the box below. I'll get to them as soon as I can, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com, and if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well, and that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.